now ask that the live stream is started. Thank you. I will, as we've done previously, I will ask each person present to confirm that they can hear and be heard. This is a legal requirement for virtual meetings. Where practical, please also have your video switched on. So I should go through the members of the forum alphabetically. David Bennett.
Here.
Christine Bryan.
Yes, I can hear. Thank you.
Myself. Alec Davies, sorry.
Hi, yes, I can hear.
Paul Deneen. Yeah. Thank you, Paul. Nikki Emmett.
Hello, yes, I can hear.
Thank you. Nikki Gilbert. I don't think Nikki's here, is she? No.
No, she's not present today, Chair.
Andy Goslin.
Yes,
Yeah.
I am. I can hear.
Georgie Griffin.
Has sent her apologies, Chair.
Ed Gwillam.
Is not present at the moment.
Martin Henton.
Has sent apologies as he's not.
Ali Jackson.
He's not present.
Sue Jenkins. I don't think I've seen Sue yet.
She sent her apologies. She's yeah, she's not well today.
Paul Jennings. Paul's definitely here. Yeah.
Yes, I can hear. Thank you, Chair.
Steve Kendrick.
Not present at the moment.
Tim Knapp.
Hi, I'm here. Hello, everyone.
Thank you. Tracy Neal.
Yes, I can hear. Thank you.
Chris Leonard-Donsky.
Yes, I'm here. I can both see and hear. Thank you.
Sean Lyons.
Yes, I can hear.
Rose Lloyd. Rose,
yes, I can hear.
Norman Moon.
Yes, I can hear.
And Kathy is obviously here and can be heard because we're spoken.
Yes, I'm here.
And we also have the following officers in attendance. We have Sarah Buffrey, the clerk.
Yes, I can hear you, Chair, just to confirm.
Malcolm Green.
Yes, I can hear you, Chair, yes.
Thank you. Les Knight.
Yes.
I don't think Les is here yet, is he?
No, not at the moment.
Kerry Morgan, who's our Assistant Director of Education.
Yes, good morning all. Yeah, I can see and hear, thank you, Chair.
James Vickery for Democratic Services.
Yeah, yeah.
And Jenny, who's been...
Yes, I can hear you, Chair.
Do we have anybody else in attendance?
I think Ed is just joining us now, Ed Gwillam. We'll just let his audio connect and we can just double check that he can hear us and we can hear him.
Just wait till Ed arrives. Can't see Ed at the moment. I'll just carry on while Ed's
yeah, I think he's connected now, Chair. If you just want to double check that he can hear us and we can hear him. Oh.
No, Ed unmute. Oh yes, he's put a thumb up. Yeah.
Yes, I can.
So thank you. The agenda papers and other relevant information for this meeting are available for public viewing on the Herefordshire Council website. The Council is streaming this meeting live on the Herefordshire Council YouTube channel, and a recording will be available via the Council's website shortly after the meeting has concluded. Others are permitted to film, photograph and record our public meetings, provided that it does not disrupt the business of the meeting. Microphones should be muted unless you are speaking to prevent background noise. When invited to speak, unmute your microphone, and once you have finished, mute it again. Please use the raise hand icon to indicate that you wish to speak. Please remember to lower your hand again after you have spoken. Where forum members are required to vote on an item, we will conduct an electronic vote where the majority of attendees are eligible to vote. If there are problems with the electronic vote or only a limited subgroup are eligible to vote, I'll ask each member in turn to indicate verbally if they are for or against or abstaining. If a forum member has not been present for the whole discussion on an item, they should not vote on that item. Are there any questions about these procedures before we move on? That's fine. So we now go to the agenda, which I shall open and then pass on. So thank you everybody, as I said earlier, for coming. As the outgoing chair, I shall just do the first item and then hand on. So, but just thank you everybody for having me as chair. I've actually, as most of you know, I actually am a governor, or a trustee now, and I found it really useful to be part of this group. So thank you everybody for going along with me on this chairmanship. So I'll now go to item 1, to elect a chairperson for the ensuing year. I call for nominations for the role of chairperson of the Herefordshire Schools Forum. We have one nomination, I think I understand. Sarah, is that right?
Hang on. I think Tracy's trying to unmute herself.
She's trying desperately to unmute her. My spacebar isn't working. Yes, can I nominate Cathy Weston if she's prepared to stand?
Thank you. And do we have a second for that proposal?
Yeah.
Yeah, Paul Dineen, please.
You weren't prepared to stand then, were you, Julie?
I've been chair. It's fine to hand on, isn't it?
Okay.
So we have so please cast your vote to elect the. So we have now the candidates have been added to the voting system, which will appear shortly on your screen. Please cast your vote and press the submit button. If you cannot see the voting screen or unable to vote, please raise your hand. Would the clerk please bring up the voting screen?
Thank you. All votes have been cast there, and that is unanimously in support of Cathy to be elected as chair.
I don't quite know if I'm supposed to say thank you, but thank you for your votes of confidence at least. I confirm I would be happy to take on this role.
Thank you, Cathy. So I shall now hand over to you. Thank you.
So thank you, Julie, for all that you've done for the Schools Forum, particularly over a very difficult period. So we now need, I understand, to appoint a vice chair. So I would call for nominations for the role of vice chair of Herefordshire Schools Forum. Could I nominate Julie? Please.
Yes, you can do that from the chair, Cathy.
I would do that then, please, Clark.
And do we have a seconder?
There are a number of us waiting for that.
Are there any more nominations for vice chair?
I see none, Cathy.
Okay, so if we could vote on that, please, Clark.
All votes have now been cast on that, and that's in support of Julie to be elected as vice chair.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Julie, for keeping that involvement on the Schools Forum and taking on that role as vice chair for the coming time period. So now we move to the agenda. Are there any apologies for absence?
As I've perhaps indicated before, we've got apologies from Sue Jenkins, from Martin Henton, and from Georgie Griffin.
Thank you, Clark. And can you confirm, please, if there are any named substitutes?
No, we don't have any named substitutes present today.
Thank you. And are there any declarations of interest?
I think Chris Lewandowski has an interest to declare.
Right, I declare an interest in the trade union facility time budget.
Thank
Same
you.
for me.
Thank you, Paul. And are there any matters arising that are not dealt with elsewhere on the agenda, please, everyone? Okay. So, Clark, if I could ask you to bring up the voting screen to approve the minutes. If you were not present at the last meeting, you should abstain from this vote.
Thank you. Those have been approved.
Thank you, Clark. Thank you, everybody, for that. Now we have the item 7, the school's budget, to agree the school's budget for 2022-23. And for this matter, I'd like to call on Malcolm, please, to present this report.
Thank you, Kathy, for the introduction. All of the information required regarding the school budget is set out in the papers before you. It reflects the consultation paper that was issued to schools in the autumn. And what I would like to do is I've got a little presentation which I will run through, which sets out the key points. I'd then like to ask Paul Jennings, chair of the budget working group, to say a few words about the meeting we had and the report contained in the supplementary paper that was circulated to Schools Forum. I'll share my screen with the presentation now. Right, okay, hopefully everybody can see that. These budget proposals were discussed with the budget working group last week, and they provided some useful advice on the two options that we asked for views on. The recommendations before you are the same as in previous years, that we fully fund schools at the national funding formula. There is the agreed continuation of the growth in the Golden Valley secondary schools for Kingston High School of 30 additional places and Fairfield 10 additional places. And I'd probably just like Schools Forum to note that from April 24, the growth allocations will be dealt with nationally by the DFE. They are sort of withdrawing the responsibility from local authorities to centralise it again. We have a transfer to the high needs block, as we have had in previous years, and the aim of that is to fund the SEM protection scheme, which is much valued by head teachers. The increase in de-delegation and the education management charge are by the inflation of 3%, which was what the DFE applied to our settlement. The PFI factor, I've increased that by 7.2%, which was not foreseen in the consultation paper. The 7.2% is the November Retail Prices Index, which excludes mortgage interest, published by the Office for National Statistics. And that is a significant increase over what we have used in previous years. And it is significantly above the planning assumptions of 2.5% in the PFI funding model, and that will require the council to put extra money into the PFI project. As I've said, we sought the budget working group advice on how much to transfer to the high needs block, and also about the proposal for de-delegation to support the behaviour support team. I hope head teacher colleagues are aware of the supplementary schools grant that the DFE have issued. An additional 1.6 billion was allocated by government in the autumn spending review. 1.2 billion of that is going to be allocated to schools in a supplementary grant, which is outside of the national funding formula. The figures aren't shown on the slide. Largely, it comes down to an extra approximately £200 per pupil for secondary schools and approximately £150 per pupil for primary schools. The exact number will depend on the number of free school meal Ever 6 eligible pupils, which DFE have yet to finalise. Part of the intention of the supplementary grant is to cover the increase in national insurance for the social care levy of 1.25%. The grant more than covers that and adds some extra to cover inflation. For example, a 500 pupil secondary school will receive about £94,000. The social care levy, as far as I can work out, will be about 17 or 18,000. 100 pupil primary school will receive about £14,000, and the social care levy is about 2,500. Welcome news indeed. The 325 million difference between the extra supplementary grant that was approved in total, 325 million has been added into the high needs block, and we will receive 800,000 extra for the high needs budget, which over the next couple of months we will bring to the budget working group, and will be on the agenda for schools forum in March. The 800,000 is most welcome. The budget working group were given two options on the transfer to the high needs block. Option A was to transfer the whole surplus funding from the growth fund, which was 507,000, and that does not cover the increase in spend on the SEN protection fund, which I'll say a little bit later. And option B was to transfer less to the high needs block and allocate £6 per pupil. The £6 per pupil under option B is a relatively small amount by comparison to the funding allocated in the supplementary grant, and option B would require a cap that was set at 165, which basically means that we would spend £60,000 less on the SEN protection scheme. The budget working group was content to accept our proposal for option A, so we can continue with the level of support for the SEN protection scheme. And over the next month or so, I will look at how the scheme works and what the cap should be, so that Schools Forum can consider final details in March. At the moment, the decision that needs to be taken today is simply on the transfer to the high needs block, rather than what the cap will be. So the cap is provided on an indicative basis. Schools Forum also needs to agree the de-delegation proposal, and that will be for local authority members only by phase 2 to make that decision. As I said before, it's broadly as previous years, but with a 3% inflationary increase, which reflects the 3% applied to school budgets. There were two proposals for behaviour support service. Option A was £4 per pupil, which allowed the continuation of a minimum service. And option B is £5 per pupil, which allowed some expansion of the service. Both options will be matched by equal funding from the high needs block. And Les Knight was very clear that without the support of the delegation, the service will need to be curtailed from this September 2022. And the reason for that is largely the poor trading position of the behaviour support service, largely due to COVID arrangements. The reasons, the option A was supported by the budget working group, and they offered and suggested that we should have a review prior to making another decision for 2023-24. The budget working group valued the service and felt it was premature to cease the service before the publication of the DfE's SEND review. If there's any questions on this, then I'm sure Les would be more than happy to answer any questions. The final part, which I just wish to run through, is the early years formula. Again, there has been an inflationary increase, which I think is 3.9% added to the funds we have received from DfE. The current formula and the proposals with the inflationary increases set out on the slide. We went out to consultation with the early years providers and gave them an option where they could propose a reduction in the hourly rate in exchange for increased early years advisor support. We had the results of the consultation and 72% were in favour of increasing the budgets in line with inflation, i.e. the proposals we've set out on the slide and in the Schools Forum report, and without any increased advisor support, which is available for them to purchase separately if they so wish that. Again, Rose Lloyd is on Schools Forum, and Rose, I think, is prepared to answer any questions or might wish to comment on the early years formula. Lastly, there are the central services block recommendations to approve, which is how we spend the 780,000 that we get. It is all pretty much an inflation increase on the previous year. I have increased the national licenses to reflect the actual invoice we get from the DfE, because the national copyright licenses, etc., are all arranged by the DfE, and they simply recharge us the cost of that. It is slightly more than the 3% inflation, and that's due to increases in pupil numbers as the national licenses are charged on a per pupil basis. I've put an asterisk against SACRE because we had a proposal from the chair of SACRE to increase SACRE's budget, and we considered that at the budget working group, and the proposal was really in two parts. The papers are set out as an appendix to the budget working group supplementary report. The proposals were in two parts. Firstly was to increase the core running of the service. The chair wanted a budget of 6,120, and the proposals from that we consulted on were an increase to 6,000. So I was very happy to agree an extra £120. There was also proposals for funding to arrange conferences, and the budget working group felt that they would prefer to work directly with the chair of SACRE, and two secondary schools offered to do that, to see whether such conferences could be done on a traded basis. And that would avoid reducing the transfer to the high needs block to make that extra funding. And again, if there's any questions on that, I think we're more than happy to answer. And lastly, I'll just say for information only, because the high needs budget will come back to the forum in March for approval. The forecast as we have at November is 105k overspend for this year, which is modest. I've worked out the forecast for the SEN protection scheme, and that is an additional £100,000 over. So it's likely the high needs block will be £200,000 overspend. We have 400,000 in reserve. So again, we could meet that small overspend and still remain in surplus at the end of the year. We must be one of very few, if not the only authority that is still in surplus at the year end. I've mentioned the 800,000 and some of the costs that we're aware of. There's the match funding for the behaviour service support service. My intention is to fund special schools in the PRU for the social care levy costs at £100 per place. That is a simple way of doing it. The PRU Management Committee have asked for extra 170k to develop an external alternative provision programme, which I think is largely based on the outdoor centre at Dinador. And we need to work through how best to allocate the 800,000 and come back to the budget working group and schools forum. I think that is probably all I wish to say. I'm happy to answer any questions, but possibly firstly, Paul Jennings might like to comment on the budget working group, and then perhaps Rose Lloyd say something about the early years. On that basis, I'll pass back to the chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Malcolm, for that extensive detail on these recommendations. Are there questions for Rose or for Paul or any of us?
I have a question for Malcolm, but I've forgotten how to raise my hand. Sorry.
Thank you, Nikki.
The supplementary school grant that obviously doesn't include special schools. I understand that you've just said that you're going to send 800,000 to the high needs block and £100 per place to school for the social care aspect of it, national insurance. I think we really need to be very, very cautious, because when you're saying that we're transferring money to the high needs block, it implies that it's spent on pupils. We are still no further forward in having the baseline of £10,000 per pupil, which was introduced in 2014. That has never increased. And Malcolm, you've been very, very careful and clever with the high needs block and the tariffs reflecting the increased cost of staffing in special schools. But, you know, the high needs block, everybody who's not working in a special school you would gauge that that is actually going on the pupils. And because of the lack of SEN national funding formula, which we've been promised and promised and promised, the money that goes to the high needs block, you know, the teachers in special schools, the national insurance, the tax contributions, they all go up in line with the teachers in mainstream schools, and yet the special schools are not allocated the same supplementary school grant allocation as the others. And I know this is an open-ended question because we are still waiting, but every single year money goes to the high needs block in order to compensate for the lack of inflation-linked funding for the overall cost of running a special school, which is the same as everybody else with the bills and the admin staff. And ongoing, it's not right that the high needs block is used to fund the additional costs of staff other than the pupils' needs, which is what is happening. And I just want to make that, you know, everybody aware of that, because it's the only way that any of the funding to special schools can be increased, because it's never been increased since 2014. And we know what inflation has been like. And is there anything from this supplementary school grant that has acknowledged that special schools are still waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting for something that is still, you know, how long is a piece of string?
Thank you, Nikki. If I could first ask Malcolm to respond.
Yeah, of course. Regarding the £10,000 per place, Nikki, we expect that to be addressed in the DFE SEND review, which again has been promised for this term, but it's been promised many times before. So we'll have to wait and see what it appears. I think the DFE are well aware that the £10,000 per place has been frozen since 2014. The £800,000 that has been passed to Herefordshire through the high needs block, we will look carefully about how to make that money work for special schools. The budget consultation that we issued in the autumn proposed a 2% increase on tariffs A to C and a 5% increase on tariffs D to F. If there is a little bit of extra money in there, I would want to increase the tariffs that are mainly in special schools, the D to F tariffs, so that we can make sure that special schools get a similar inflation increase as to mainstream schools. For those of you who are not aware, a typical special school, 50% of the income is fixed on the £10,000 place amount, which has remained fixed, and the other 50% is based on the per pupil tariffs, which basically means in order to give a special school a 3% increase per pupil, the tariffs have to go up by 6%. And that is something, Nikki, we will look carefully at in the next month or so. And I would imagine that Les can arrange for me to come to a special school head teachers meeting for a discussion about budgets and such before we finalise the budget. So I hope that reassures you.
Thank you. It sounds wrong to everybody that the tariffs are actually going on increased costs, not all just pupil based, because the high needs budget is, as you know, spread around the whole high needs regardless of special schools. And if anybody's got any weight behind making sure that this SEN review does actually happen, it would be really good, because then maybe the high needs budget could then be spent on the pupils again.
Thank you, Nikki, and thank you, Malcolm. Les and Chris both have a contribution, and I'm sure they'll add to that response. Les, if I could call on you, please.
Yeah, is my microphone working? Can you just confirm that?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thanks. I've got a new laptop. Nikki mentioned the formula for SEN, and I don't think there's ever been the intention, or certainly not recently, to bring in a national formula for SEN, other than for the amount that local authorities get funded for. So it's not intended to be there hasn't recently been an intention to bring in a national formula in the way that mainstream schools get funded, almost directly by the government. It's still intended to be local discretion once you've got the global amount for the authority. So.
Thank you for pointing that out. Chris Lewandowski, if I could call on you to respond, please.
Yes, mine's a slightly different point, looking at the budget in a wider context, but it relates to comments that Malcolm made. On page 21 of the paper, it states that school funding through the National Funding Formula, NFF, is increasing by 3.2% overall in 2022-23. I'm not sure when this was written, but initially this seems positive. However, it should be remembered that inflation is currently of the order of 5% CPI, 7.2% RPI, and it's predicted to rise to 6 or 7% in April, i.e. it's going up very significantly. With some sectors, such as energy, likely to go up at a much higher rate. Now, most schools are not particularly energy efficient. How many schools do you know that are double glazed? Not to mention the need to keep windows open for ventilation purposes for COVID. Perhaps the 3.2% is not looking so positive. School teachers' salaries are also a very large part of the school budget. In 2021-22, the government froze school teacher salaries. In 2022-23, i.e. this year, the freeze was lifted, but no one knows how much the STRB, School Teachers Pay Review Body, will recommend, which is payable in September. However, it is the government's stated intention that by 2023-24, the M1 starting salary from a teacher will rise from £25,714 to £30,000, which is a very significant rise, and that's in the next 2 years. How much of it will come this year and how much of it will come next year, we don't know. Obviously, schools need to plan their budget spending for the year, but it's very difficult with these unknown factors. High inflation, higher energy costs, what's STRB going to recommend? Now, as Malcolm has already stated, there has already been one supplementary grant given to the school's budget by central government, but that's to cover national insurance contributions and a little bit of inflation. Inflation is now going to be much higher, we know that, and energy costs are going to be even higher still. In order to help with the planning, should it not be that this schools forum and Herefordshire Council should be writing to the DFE and the Minister of State for Education, expressing these concerns and requesting yet another supplement for schools' budgets to help with these costs that are payable later in 2022. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris, for raising those points. Malcolm, could I ask you to express your views on that, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. The paper was written in early September prior to the government's autumn spending review. So the 3% in the reports, Chris, represents the state of play in September. The supplementary grant that has been allocated to schools is equivalent to another 3% extra increase per pupil, which net of the National Insurance Social Care Levy is 1.75%. So that will give schools just short of a 5% increase per pupil, which clearly is less than the 7.2 RPI% recorded in November. It's my understanding from government economic forecasts that they expect the inflation rate to dip in the near future, and this is a short-term peak, but I mean, who knows, we'll have to wait and see. But I think that's all I would want to say on a factual basis. Thank you.
And thank you, Malcolm. Regarding the points that Chris has raised about any correspondence to the DFE or the Ministry of the Minister for Schools for Education, would you be in favour of that? Malcolm, would you be in favour of composing a letter on behalf
sorry,
of,
I was waiting for a response from school forum members. I mean, it can do no harm, can it?
No, absolutely.
I mean, I'm sure that the DFE and ministers are acutely aware of the rising cost of energy and inflation, but to remind them would do no harm. And I think the government have always said that they will meet the cost of the minimum increase to the teacher's salary of £30,000, but we've yet to see exactly what the details of that will be, as I gather it continues to be delayed. But yes, I mean, I can see no reason why schools forum shouldn't write expressing those sorts of sentiments.
Okay, so that could be something that we could take on. Are there any more views or comments or queries before we vote on this? Paul or Rose, would you like to make any contributions on behalf of Budget Working Group and Early Years?
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to go back to the meeting that we had, and you know, what a delight it was to welcome Lama Chosang to the meeting to talk about SACRE. In terms of the two steers really that the Budget Working Group were able to give, the first one in terms of the high needs, it was very strong agreement for option A to support that recommendation. Following our usual informed discussion and questioning, again with the behaviour support, there was quite a discussion amongst the group about behaviour support being part of a joined up process as opposed to a standalone team, and that was quite an interesting discussion that I'm sure we'll pick up again. But as Malcolm said, the overwhelming feeling is that service is valued, and that we wanted to do what we could to keep that alive and to keep that available for our students, with the proviso that we have that review before the 23-24 academic year. It was a really good meeting. It was as I said, our usual robust discussions, and we were very happy to be able to make those recommendations to Schools Forum this morning. I'd just like to publicly thank Malcolm for the work that he puts in preparing those meetings for us and the work that goes into the preparation of the budgets each year. And just a brief summary from me, but just reminding what our recommendations were to Schools Forum this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul, and that's echoed to Malcolm. And I just need to alert you to our grass being cut right outside my window, so apologies if there's any sound interference. Rose, on behalf of Early Years, is there anything you'd like to contribute?
Just really to say that the results of the consultation wasn't really a surprise. We're kind of, as with everybody, we're between a rock and a hard place as to whether we get more support or we have the money straight into the set-ins. Obviously, we haven't had an increase for several years yet, and obviously with COVID and everything else, there has been a lot of implications. I'm aware that there are some set-ins that are now getting into financial issues because of COVID and how long it's going on for, and the guidance that we've got that if somebody's off, we're not supposed to charge them for their place or anything else that's going on. So a lot of set-ins are starting to struggle as it's so long, and I guess we've just got to keep an eye on sufficiency and how we go forward from here for the early years and going forward into the future, really.
Thank you, Rose. Are there any further comments or queries before we carry on with vote one? Les, if you'd like to.
Yeah, just to say on the point that Malcolm went over in the paper on the pupil referral service, the increase to them will be matched by a similar number of places for that money. So it's actually an increase in places they'll be able to facilitate. So for those that remember, we reduced the number of places because the demand had been low because of COVID, in order to facilitate a remodelling within the pupil referral service. Unfortunately, the numbers have risen faster than we anticipated post-COVID. I mean, we knew that was a potential risk. And so the extra funding that's being described there will provide 10 to 12 new places in the service. So we're not giving them money for no reason in that sense. If we didn't use those places, we'd be having to seek places in independent schools and such like at greater cost. So it's, just to clarify that in case people thought we were just, dishing out more money for no reason.
Thank you, Les, for confirming that information. Are there any more views or comments to be expressed before we continue to take our first vote of this morning? Okay, so voting on these recommendations is restricted by regulation to school members, academy members, and early years representatives only. Those attendees who are not eligible to vote on these recommendations, please abstain in the upcoming polls. The recommendations are to be grouped into 3 blocks for voting unless there are any objections from forum members. I can't see any objections Clark, can you?
No, I think everyone's fine with that, Chair. So
Okay,
yeah,
so I'm just going to read the summary of the recommendations 1 to 6 for vote 1, and these are inclusive as set out in the report and spoken about by Malcolm. So the recommendation is that 1, the final school funding values as set out recommendation 1 in the report be agreed, subject to a minimum total funding per pupil of £4,265 for primary schools and £5,525 for secondary schools, including the minimum funding guarantee at 2%. Point 2, additional growth funding of £179,240 for 2022-23 be approved for recommendation to the Cabinet Member for Children and Families for Kingston High School and Fairfield High School as set out in the report. Point 3, transfer to High Needs Block to support the SEN Protection Scheme of £507,224 and to set the school funding cap at £160 for numbers on roll for 2022-23, subject to further consideration of the funding cap at the March meeting of Schools Forum. Point 4 is that prior to submission to the DFE, any minor adjustments to the school's budget up to £5,000 is required to comply with the regulations be made to the funding allocated to the growth fund to provide a contingency. Point 5, that Schools Forum approve an inflationary increase for the Central Support Services funding for 2022-23 and advise the Cabinet Member for Children and Families for information as set out in the report. And point 6, that Schools Forum accept the Budget Working Group's advice regarding approval of the proposal for additional funding from SACRE to increase expenditure on activities for schools and training. Please cast your vote now and press the submit button. If you cannot see the voting screen or are unable to vote, please raise your hand. Chair, we have a hand raised for Steve Kendrick.
Yeah, I can't see the voting screen, so.
Okay. All other votes have been cast. So, Steve, are you happy just to indicate if you are supporting those recommendations?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I'll add that to the tally then, and those recommendations have been carried, Chair.
Thank you, everybody, and Clark for that vote. Is everybody happy that we move on to recommendation 7 vote for our second vote this morning?
Sorry, Kathy.
Yes.
Just to say, perhaps it could be noted the abstain was for those who weren't eligible to vote, rather than we were abstaining because we weren't happy with it. I think that should perhaps be clear. It may be better to say those in favour, those against, those not eligible to vote.
Clark,
clarity, really.
Clark, can you?
Yes, that's fine. Yes, it was. We can look at making those adjustments. Yeah, we've adjusted last time. I think that last time we were moving people out of the room for non-voting, and we didn't feel that didn't work terribly well. So this was Plan B. But yes, that's quite correct. That those abstaining are those who are not eligible to vote, as opposed to not expressing support for the recommendations.
Thank you.
So if we move to our second vote for recommendation 7, voting on these recommendations is restricted by regulation to representatives of local authority schools only, and further restricted by phase where dedelegation applies, specifically to primary or secondary schools. As this is a small number, I will ask the clerk to take the vote by roll call. The recommendation is that local authority maintained school members approve the dedelegation of funding in 2022-23 and advise the Cabinet Member for Children and Families as set out in the report. Would the clerk please now take the vote?
Thank you, Chair. This vote is broken then into 3 subparts according to phase. Part 7A is a recommendation for local authority primary schools only. And that is that the trade union facilities be approved at £2.60 per pupil. And for simplicity for this vote, I'll run through the primary school representatives present and just ask you to confirm if you are in support of that recommendation or not. So we have Steve Kendrick. Yes. Tracy Neal.
Yes, that's fine.
Norman Moon.
Yes, that's fine.
And Kathy Weston.
Yes, I approve.
So that one is carried. Part B is for secondaries only, and that is that the trade union facilities be provided through a service level agreement at £2.60 per pupil. And as Martin Henton has given his apologies, Andy Gosling, can I just confirm that you are supportive of that recommendation?
Yes, I am. Yeah.
Thank you. The remaining parts of recommendation 7 apply to both primary and secondary. And therefore I'll just run through those. And these relate to the school budgeting software, ethnic minority support, school meals entitlement assessment, the behaviour support service being option A at £4 per pupil, and the statutory education services for non-academy schools to be charged at £12.25 per pupil, all as set out in the report. So again, I'll just run through the local authority representatives present just to confirm that you are content with those recommendations. Andy Gosling.
Yes, I am.
Steve Kendrick.
Yes, I am.
Tracy Neal.
Yes, I am.
Norman Moon.
Yes, I am.
And Kathy Weston.
Yes, I am.
Okay, thank you. That concludes recommendation 7 in the paper, Chair.
Thank you, everybody, for voting, taking part there. So we now come to our third vote this morning, recommendations 8 and 9. The recommendation is point 8, the early years funding formula for Herefordshire providers from April 2022 be approved for recommendation to the Cabinet Member for Children and Families as set out in the report. Point 9, the school's budget be approved for recommendation to the Cabinet Member for Children and Families as follows. Point A, a balanced schools budget be approved for 2022-23, and B, the uncommitted DSG reserves of £432,000 be carried forward to the financial year 2023-24, adjusted by any under or overspend in the DSG at year end. Voting on these recommendations is restricted by regulation to school members, academy members, and early years representatives only. Would the clerk please bring up the voting screen?
Can I just confirm, was there anyone who wasn't able to vote? No. Steve, were you having difficulty again? Yep. Can I, yeah, do you just want to confirm verbally?
Yeah, I'm fine.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody, for those votes. And that has been carried.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so that concludes the business of the morning, I believe, Clark.
I think so. Steve Kendrick, did you have a point to raise, or was that a legacy hand?
Sorry, it's legacy.
Yeah.
I'm actually due to go. I've got to go actually, so thank you.
Well, thank you, everybody, for attending this morning's meeting. Have a good weekend, everyone. The next meeting is Friday, the 18th of March. And please, Clark, could I have confirmation that the live stream